where I belong is, for me, means where I'm comfortable in the here and now. And where I hope to go is about your ambitions and your hopes for the future. And if design can deliver those things, and human consumers can realize they have the opportunity every day to remix those things, that would be, I think, a great world to live in.
This is Liam Maher, my guest on this episode of Lives of Tomorrow. Today, we're looking into the future of design. Liam's a creative director in the fashion world and a published author with a wealth of experience and passion for how design is evolving and what that means for the world we live in. You'll have no doubt come across ECCO, the Danish shoe brand, where he currently leads the design team. And if you're fascinated by what he has to say, it's well worth picking up his new book, Menswhere, A Lost History of the Militant Guild of Rural Tailors. Today, we'll talk about design, innovation, and even some of the stories that came out of interviewing countless designers about the history of men's fashion. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN, the world's leading trend forecasting company, and you're listening to Lives of Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast about how we will live our lives in the future. Liam, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I can outdo the introduction you just gave me, but that's pretty accurate. I also, this is a little off script, but I wanted to thank you for a couple things. You might not know this, but as we speak, the Polaris Dawns team from SpaceX are testing a new spacesuit on a spacewalk. It's happening today.
Okay.
And some time ago, when you were at your former company, Sarah McGiven, a freelancer.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, did an interview with me when I used to be at Denham, the Gene Maker, regarding the space training kit we had done for ECCO. That was back in 2013, I think. So we've come full circle now. There's suits in space, and I'm finally getting to meet you.
Oh,
so
I love
thank you for that.
Oh, well, it's so first of all, no one has ever thanked me for anything on this podcast. So I'm gonna take that credit, and for something that happened so long ago as well. I do think the world has a way of bringing people back round together when they're meant to know each other. So I'm going to say that there's something at play here. Okay, so I'd love for our listeners to get to know you a little bit better. So you studied fine art and painting some years ago. You worked as a visual merchandiser. You designed streetwear collections. Did you always know that design was what you wanted to do? Was this a kind of childhood ambition?
Yeah, I think a young suburban boy in America, I wanted to dress up, look like a rock star, all the stuff that kids did back then. My great-grandfather was a country tailor in Ireland, and my great-grandfather on my other side, my mother's side, was a master weaver in Wales. So I also kind of grew up with the mythology of those men. I didn't meet them, obviously, but so that might have contributed to my aspirations. I have to say that for me, everything is about narrative. And it's a multidisciplinary thing. That's what we've tried to do with the book. There's design, but there's also obviously art direction and photography and writing, all coming to bear to produce a narrative. But of those things, I think products that we call them consumers, I prefer to call them people. And products wrap themselves around human beings fully. I mean, I once did a sort of fake mathematical formula to figure out how many degrees of touch or in a jacket or a shoe, and it's something like 6,000 something degrees of touch coming at you kind of from all directions of the sphere. And so this enfolding somebody, I don't want to get, too sentimental, but for me, it's always felt sort of like a communion. Engagement with a product and bringing a product into your life is a kind of communion, and it's a communion that is at the heart of the narrative, ultimately.
But why do you think designers are so important? And given what you've just said, I think you're kind of leaning into it, but can you articulate that? And I think it is, and we will talk about this a bit, but in a world where we were bombarded with conversations and headlines and information about AI and technology, why does a human designer still resonate, and why are they important?
I take some solace. The idea that AI's strength is scraping the collective. I've heard that phrase from people who are advocating the power of AI that can scrape the collective very quickly. So it strikes me that if the strength of that tool is to scrape the collective, then the strength of the designer more than ever is to mine deeply into the individual, which is the opposite of what a tool like AI does. It's about emotion in the end. And those tools don't produce emotion. Emotion has to come from humans. And lastly, I think, and this is when I'm as a creative director, I'm less involved in individual products these days. But during the time when I have done that, and I've been lucky enough to see someone on the street, wearing something that I had something to do with, I always feel like a human has just had an engagement with another human. And I actually think that's what humans, consumers, are so hungry for. And I think they're more hungry for human connection than ever. And I think the challenge for designers then is to examine their own individual humanity and make sure that is brought to bear in their work. And that can also take courage. A lot of the stories in the book and also the way I talk at my day job has to do with thinking about design, also kind of human expression, but certainly including design, through the lenses of where I come from, where I belong, and where I hope to go. I'm in the practice of looking at all design through those three lenses. It's just a coded way of talking about personality and your individual identity, which is made up of where I come from, where I belong, where I hope to go.
I really love that.
Yeah, and I think, my favorite designers, when I see their work, also some of the folks I'm lucky enough to work with at ECCO, that's what they're doing. They're orchestrating this kind of three-part harmony of where I come from, where I belong, where I hope to go, and they're being imaginative in what perspective they take on those three things to constantly produce something that's simultaneously very new and surprising at the same time as being deeply authentic because it's rooted in all three of these perspectives.
What do you think that design teaches us about ourselves? So not necessarily for a creative, but coming back to the consumer/human being, what do you think our interaction with design can teach us?
Every day when we get up, we have this unique opportunity to prepare ourselves to face the world. And it would be a horrible thing if that effort was only limited to fashion. That would be a fairly superficial world to be interacting with. But it has to do with everything. It has to do with how you treat people, how you enter a room. And in preparing yourself for that, you have this opportunity to reblend where I come from, where I belong, and where I hope to go. And I think to take a moment to be a little introspective at that gateway, because that's ultimately an introduction, right? You're introducing yourself to people. And where I come from is about legacy and heritage, and it's your DNA. Where I belong is, for me, means where I'm comfortable in the here and now. And where I hope to go is about your ambitions and your hopes for the future. And if design can deliver those things, and human consumers can realize they have the opportunity every day to remix those things, that would be, I think, a great world to live in. And I don't think it's that naive. I do see it happening with lots of people I know, as well as the folks that do the designing.
I was doing lots of presentations in New York last week, and some very high-end fashion brands, beauty brands, and then at a big conference when you had all sorts of different companies and all sorts of different people. And I'm very much a hand luggage only person, as someone who travels all the time. I cannot be bothered with waiting for things. And I didn't pack particularly thoughtfully, and I didn't feel I showed up as my best self. And I went shopping this week, and as someone who runs a trend forecasting company, there is a sort of expectation that you dress a certain way. And probably because of that expectation, I resist it slightly. Like, I am who I am and I will not change as a consequence. But anyway, long story short, went and got a few new things and have turned up in those this week and felt really good and positive. And I was showing up as my best version of myself, but I was also showing up and representing the brand that I, face and front. And and it made me feel good. It made me feel good. Design made me feel good this week.
You had a conversation with Jane Shepherdson, right?
Yes.
From Topshop. And I'm a real fanboy of hers. So it was lovely to hear you guys talking about that stuff. She touched on a lot of things that I felt good about. And she talked about, or you guys talked about, value. What kinds of value can be embedded into a garment or a piece of footwear or an accessory? And she had a higher standard than some. She had a long list of things that you should expect these things to do for you, which I found really encouraging. I also I spoke about it with my wife afterwards. And I asked her, because I'm involved and have been involved in both men's and women's wear most of my career. The book is focused specifically on menswear. And I asked her about if in her wardrobe there are pieces that have accumulated meaning after she bought them. A designer should bring as much meaning as possible into the piece. But it's what makes things for me really special is if they keep accumulating meaning afterwards. Having worked in the jeans business for a long time, it's kind of a cliche about how jeans fade and you can kind of map your life story with them. At ECCO, we work with leather, and leather as a material does a great job doing that also with memory. But I think it's much broader than that. And I would credit folks who are endeavoring to make sure that not only have they considered authentically where I come from, where I belong, where I hope to go in their work, but that the other human, the consumer, can pick it up from there and continue to have value kind of accumulate in those pieces through memory and experience, obviously.
Yeah, I've got this raggedy old pair of denim shorts that were from H&M. They probably cost, I don't know, £15, if that, I would say at least 10 years ago. And they go with me on every single holiday because they are the comfiest things ever. Because it's denim, they'll go with a bikini top or a vest top. And so all my holiday photos have me wearing these particular pairs. I will never throw those away. Right, I'm going to pause this narrative for some quick-fire questions, trying to get to know you. Who do you look up to and why?
Well, I have to say my wife, Jennifer, because she manifests the mix of all of our noblest character traits. And because she's added so much to everything that I have done. I mean, I download every day at the office with her. She was a big part of the book. She'd have to be the one. If I could have a second one.
I'll let you have a second one. There are very few rules in this conversation, so you can have a second.
I'm just so impressed by the painter Anselm Kiefer, the way he looks at narrative in such a grand scale, not in lifetimes, but in millennia, and manifests that in his works of fine art and sculpture and painting has been truly astounding.
When did you last give up on something?
I have committed in my life to various exercise regimes. Of course, we do that every New Year's, like everybody. And I even bought a spin cycle. We used to go spinning, and we used to love it, the music and everything. And I thought, I'll get one of those. I can do it myself. I'll turn the music on. And I have to say that spin cycle is in the back room with a fairly thick layer of dust on it.
What do you rarely share about yourself?
Well, I've mentioned it a couple times here. I'm tremendously sentimental, and that's a characteristic that doesn't always play very well in a job within a corporation. It's better in a creative role. Of course, it's allowed a bit more. But I remember when the River Dance, when Riverdance first happened, it first was aired on TV in the States. I mentioned my Irish heritage, but I was really, really working to hold back the tears on that. So I would not. Now I've told however many listeners you have, but I would even cry at Riverdance. That's how
oh my
sentimental.
word! I've never heard anyone say that before. That's brilliant. Which main trend do you see right now that you think is going to change our lives most fundamentally?
I think that there's been a long, continuous march towards comfort and ebbs and flows. In the pandemic, we went full on Crocs and sweatpants or whatever, and coming out, the pendulum swung the other way because we were so desperate to dress up a little more. And those oscillations can trick you into thinking maybe the march isn't continuous. But I think the march is continuous, and I think it started somewhere at the time that unions invented weekends, and the leisure class emerged and all of that historical stuff, all the way to the unbelievable, stretch and breathable technologies that we have across all categories. And so I think it would be continuing to raise the standard on what we define as being comfortable.
Yeah, I would agree with that as someone who is sitting here in very stretchy leggings at the moment. You're dressed a lot smarter than I am for this particular conversation.
You don't know that. I got some stretch in my pants as well.
When are you satisfied with yourself?
Well, never. I mean, that's an easy answer.
I think lots of creatives feel that way, I think. There's always, maybe it's a curiosity that means that you can't sort of ever stand still because you know that there'll be something different, something to explore, something to create.
Speaking to some of the key people at ECCO, the innovation team and the folks I report to and the people I work with, one of the characteristics of the brand is that it has admittedly chronic dissatisfaction, which of course drives progress. It's a bit of a cliche, but it is true.
It is definitely true. So, Liam, the book that you've just recently published, it's sort of a collection of stories, and there are many, and you spoke to lots of very, very interesting people. What was one of the stories that really stood out for you, that stayed with you, that has a sort of message for everybody?
When we were starting a kind of network and project that became the book, a guy reached out to me over email. This is during Web 1.0. He said something, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like this: "Dear Liam, you don't know me. My name is Justice P. Goodson, and I am 15 years old, and I have started a brand of neckwear. And I would like your feedback. Please see the attached Etsy link." So I went to this Etsy link, and there were pictures of he and his younger brother who had done a photo shoot in their driveway in Piscataway, New Jersey. And there were pictures of the manufacturing process, which was he and his grandmother who had taught him to sew. And they were making bow ties, which I found to be an unexpected thing for a young teenager to want to make. And on one side of the bow tie has two pieces of fabric, front and back. And on one side was printed kente cloth. This Justice is an African American. And on the other side, it was cartoon prints from Hanna-Barbera cartoons, which are the people that did Scooby-Doo and all those American cartoons. And I thought, this young guy has in one fell swoop authentically balanced where I come from, the kente cloth to some degree, where I belong on Saturday morning watching Hanna-Barbera cartoons, and where I hope to go because it was a bow tie and he had aspirations to have a prestigious brand. Justice P. Goodson, I came to know after this interesting introduction, was invited to the White House something like 5 months ago to meet with Kamala Harris and other young Black entrepreneurs who had demonstrated the vitality and the imagination that's required with any entrepreneur. And to see him go from that initial reach out as a teenager to being this, incredibly impressive young man storming the White House. Because of the story about this kind of militant guild of rural tailors, possibly real, possibly fictional, I now reflect and I think a guy whose name is Justice Goodson has gone from the guild house to the White House. And that's been an amazing story for me to witness from where I sit.
That's so amazing. And maybe take a little bit of credit that, at 15, he was getting advice from someone like you, and now he's achieved. That's
oh my
really beautiful.
Gosh, I would love to take some credit. I'm sure there's none due.
Do you think, I know what your answer is going to be to this, but I still want to ask it anyway, which is the need for designers in the future. So let's look 10, 20, 50 years in the future. What is a designer going to look like then? Are we still going to have humans designing?
For sure, we'll still have humans designing things that will be described as being good design, I think. Maybe not all design, but good design, yes. I used to mentor a class of fashion graduate students from the Arnhem Institute of Fashion in the Netherlands. And I didn't know this before I worked with them, but when I worked with them, they sort of taught me that one way to look at design is through aspects of the head, the heart, and the hand. And the head being intellectual and cerebral, conceptual in a way, is maybe a little less conceptual, a little more urgent, working from pure emotion. And then hand is about the make and the craftsmanship and quality. And so we got in the habit of talking about the head, the heart, and the hand a lot. And I think designers, who knows, 50 years from now, but they're going to have tools, amazing ones. And I think they're going to be relied upon to use all those tools to amplify the power of the head, the heart, and the hand.
I don't normally write notes during a podcast, but I'm writing notes right now. Head, heart, hand, intellectual, conceptual, emotional, craftsmanship. I've got lots of scribbles that I'm going to take away from this. What do you think the non-creative can learn from the things that you put into your work, from the people you interviewed for the book? Because I do think people feel, and maybe this is coming back to that sort of, the story we tell ourselves about where we came from and why we are the way we are today, that, you're a creative or you're not. And actually, it's actually been quite a driving force for me in my career that I always wanted to prove that someone who came from a creative background could run a company, actually. I was sick and tired of it just being the creatives told what to do by the people in suits. And so I was out to prove that someone who had never worn a suit in her life could actually run a company and to a certain extent understand a P&L and all those kind of things. But what can people who think with a different side of their brain perhaps learn from design and designers like yourself?
The algorithms that amplify the extremes which already have charisma. Extremes are already the things you notice. We don't really need algorithms to make them even more exciting. I'm a real believer in what Ovid, when he wrote about Daedalus and Icarus, described as the middle way. In the Icarus myth, Ovid says, Daedalus says to his son Icarus, before you fly, I've made you wings, before you fly. It's a famous story. Obviously, you need to be careful not to fly too close to the sun because they're made with wax and you could perish. But he also says, equally, you need to avoid the salt foam of the ocean, which is, people mostly forget that part of the story. He says, so avoid the sun and avoid the sea. And I forget exactly how he puts it, but it's something like, you just have to avoid the temptation of either extreme. If you avoid the temptation of either extreme, in Ovid's day and in ours, you're left with the entire sky. Imagine, if Icarus had listened, he would have been able to fly freely. It would have been boundless. The only thing he had to do was avoid the temptation of either extreme. And if Ovid understood this thousands of years ago, and we told him now that we have algorithms making those extremes even more tempting, I think he would worry. So I'm a big one to try and kind of imbue the middle way with the same sort of excitement, charisma, and sex appeal that you normally associate with the extremes.
Let's just touch on sustainability for a moment, although again, I'm sure we could talk for a whole hour on that. It's really important to us. It's very important to you and your team at ECCO. And you've developed some fairly advanced new technology recently. So I'd love to hear more about it.
So ECCO Leather figured out a way to pre-tan leather without using water, without adding any water in the tannery. Normally, skins would come from their source, the abattoir, and they're packed in kind of shrink wrap, and then they're put into giant vats with water and tannins of some kind to stabilize them and turn them from a skin into leather. They reasoned that the way they're packed is already in a moist pack. So they observed that the leather had what they're calling inherent moisture when it was delivered. So if they could reconfigure the tannins so that they could disperse within a mist, almost like a fog, instead of within gallons and gallons of water, that they could create tanned leather without adding any water. And this saves 20 liters of water per skin. It's about a liter per shoe if you happen to be in the shoe business. And for us, it was 26 million liters of water for the tannery for the year, which is enough to hydrate something like 90,000 people, according to the World Health Organization. So it's a really big deal. And that's just one of many from ECCO. There's also the team is working on and has already brought out in its first iteration organic tanned leather, which is biodegradable after use if you bury it in the ground. And then I have to say the other thing that we care a lot about on the shoe side, because my role is on the shoe part of our business, shoe and leather goods. I think, like you were talking about with Jane, and we talked about earlier, I'd like to think that if products can carry as much value into the consumer's life and then be able to accumulate value after purchase, and if they're durable and meaningful, and that proposition can last as long as possible, I think keeping products on the feet or on the backs, around the backs, of people, of consumers, is the cornerstone of sustainability, particularly if it includes meaning.
Are you more anxious or hopeful about the future of design?
Oh, I'm absolutely hopeful. I have my guard up a little bit, like I said, about algorithms pushing us towards the extremes and disobeying Daedalus' advice. But I think we can circumnavigate that, like Daedalus himself did. And I'm also hopeful that technology itself might regulate a little bit to offer more, a more diverse and more surprising inspiration. But putting that aside, I'm tremendously optimistic.
Amazing. Liam, thank you so much. Huge thank you to Liam. Next week, WGSN's Create Tomorrow podcast is back with another episode where we look into the future of design and product. I'm Carla Buzasi, CEO of WGSN. I'll see you next time.